good morning. I would like us to turn our Bibles to the book of Revelation, chapter 13. We would want to get our study from the book of Revelation, chapter 1-3. But before we get there, I just want to make a quick summary of, it would have been a lesson on its own, but I thought I just needed to wrap it up. Which we find from the book of Romans chapter 13, the first five verses of the book of Romans chapter 13. We are actually going to be starting from Revelation chapter 13, but I'm also making reference to Romans chapter 13 as well, the first 5 verses. I just thought I needed to make a summary of that, because next week, for the next 2 Sundays, I won't be available, and I don't know when else am I going to get an opportunity to stand in front of you. So I could just make a summary of that. It's a lesson that I've been sharing of late with the rural brethren from Romans chapter 13 because of what I thought was very important with that lesson. Basically, in Romans chapter 13, the Apostle Paul is talking about obeying the authorities. That, of course, is talking about the civil governments that we have. So, in summary of what I've talked with the brethren in the rural areas already, by the way, we now have but we actually have 6 congregations that are up and running in the rural areas, and I'm thankful that the Lord has helped me to be very much involved in the beginning of all 6. So we are still going on and working with the rural brethren. So in some of these congregations, I've taught from Romans chapter 13 about the message that the Apostle Paul gives out about obeying the authorities. I like what it says in verse 2 of Romans chapter 13, that if we don't obey the civil governments, it's as good as we have rejected the authority of God, because all authority was put in by God. Of course, Paul does not say people are put in positions by God, but the word authority itself, or the setup of having authority, was created by God. Then people are then going to be fitted in according to their qualifications, obviously by you, by us human beings. We are the ones that are going to vote people into authorities, but the authority itself, the setup that somebody is going to be in charge of another, that is a setup that God actually created. And if we are going to deny the authority, we are denying what God has put in place. That's what verse 2 says. But the example that we have been using is the one that I just want to use now quickly, about what has been happening in our own country, Zimbabwe, in these past few months. In January, February of this year, we all know that we were on a crippling lockdown. The authorities pronounced that we were supposed to be on a lockdown because of the ravaging effects of the COVID-19. So January, February, we were actually on a lockdown. But the government came back and they actually said, of particular interest, I'm actually talking about churches that could not gather because of that. So the government came back around March and said churches can still gather now and schools can open, and everything else came back to life. But somewhere around June, the government came back again and said we needed to have another lockdown. And we again went on to a lockdown for June, July, parts of August, I think well into September, we were still on a lockdown. And the same authorities then came back and said, now look, the churches can go back and meet again, but on one condition, that you should be fully vaccinated. So it's either you take the full vaccination instruction. If you take it, you are going to come and meet with everybody. If you refuse to be fully vaccinated, then you cannot come and meet with everybody. That's what the government is saying. And at least until now, that regulation is still in place. They haven't really lifted that ban. The reason why I was talking about this with the brethren in the rural areas in particular was because of lack of enforcement. Even here, we don't really see police officers patrolling, coming here to say who is vaccinated and who is not. But I was then saying to the brethren, that should then not be taken, as an advantage to then say, okay, even if we are not fully vaccinated as the government is requiring, we are just going to go and meet, and because we know that there is no enforcement. But that is not the only point. The other point was, the same government said you should not go and meet, and we did not go, and we stayed in our homes because we were saying the government has said we should not go and meet. The government has come back and said, you can now go and meet, but please, can you meet this condition for us if you want to meet? Now people are resisting and saying the government is talking this, the government is talking that, this about the vaccine, that about the vaccine. To the brethren in the rural areas, I was very clear that I was not marketing the vaccine because I don't know where it was manufactured. But if one of them asked me why I was vaccinated, I simply would tell them that I was vaccinated because I now had two things that I wanted to weigh. Either on one side, God is calling me to assemble with my brethren. And on the other side, the government is saying, if you want to go and assemble with your brethren, get vaccinated. So I was vaccinated not because the vaccine is safe. I was not vaccinated not because the vaccine is unsafe. I really don't know the technicalities into the vaccine itself. But I was simply vaccinated because I wanted to come and gather with everybody. Because this is the question that I was asking them. And I was saying, if for example, we say, okay, I'm not going to be vaccinated and I'm not going to go to church. Because the simple reason why people don't want and resist the vaccination is because they are saying social media has told us that this is a dangerous vaccine, you are being initiated into Satanism, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I was talking to one brother who normally comes here during the week, and I was trying to find the reason why he was not coming. And of course, he mentioned the ban. Yes, the government lifted the ban. I said to him, I haven't read that. I think it's still in place. He then said to me, oh, if the ban is still in place, I'm not going to come. Then I said to him, why? Because you just don't want to be vaccinated. He said, I don't want to be vaccinated. And he started talking blah, 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 blah from the social media gossip that we have always read. Then he said to me, why were you vaccinated? Were you vaccinated because this vaccination is safe? I said to him, I don't know. The vaccination to me is safe or it's not safe, I don't care. But what I did, I just gave God a chance to protect me. I just said to God, God, now I am going into this unknown territory. It's now your wisdom that is going to guide me. I want to go and meet with my brethren. Please, if this vaccination is going to kill me, let it kill me, but innocently, I am being vaccinated because I want to go and gather with everybody. After I had said that, he said, but you actually have given me a very good advice. I think what we are doing is we are actually going ahead of God. And at times we think we can actually protect ourselves when it's actually God who does protect us. So in conclusion, I actually say to him what I also say to the brethren. I say to them, the Bible is very clear about the number of deaths and the number of days that we are going to live on earth. Each and every one of us at some point is going to die. We don't know. Maybe one of us is actually going to die before the end of this month. Maybe somebody is also going to die, might be in December. So my question was, if you were going to die in December 2021, do you think you are actually going to skip that date simply because you did not want to be vaccinated? Because it's not only the vaccine itself that kills, if it kills, but we have yet people dying before this vaccine. Are they all dying from the vaccine, the corona or the COVID vaccine? So death is always there and we cannot run away from it. But if you think about the flip side of what I've just said, if you are going to die in 2030, for example, if God wants you to die in 2030, so are you all of a sudden just going to die now simply because you received a jab, the COVID vaccine jab, and then God has decided to just shorten your length of life simply because you received the vaccine? I think all this other is pure speculation. It doesn't really make sense. But the point I wanted to make this morning from Romans chapter 13 is that Romans chapter 13 is clear, and Paul repeated this in Titus as well and elsewhere, that we are supposed to follow what the authorities are saying. For as long as what the authorities are saying is not contrary to the constitution of God, we just need to follow it. We will only become rebellious if the same government had come back and said, look, we now want you to go back and worship. But when you get to your worship places, we want you to bow down and face to the east. We have put up a Muyani statue in Harare, and we want everybody to worship that statue. Then we would stand up and say, no, look, we are not going to be able to do that. But what the government is doing, to me, is a genuine call to try and protect you and me from this ravaging COVID-19. What is wrong with that? I don't know. Let us go to Revelation chapter 13, where I want us to start from. This is connected to what we studied last week. This is also connected to what I was just saying now about the myth, about the speculation, about the lies, about the gossip that is actually going around in connection with this COVID vaccine. Like I said, and I will repeat that, I am not in any way marketing the vaccine because I don't even know it. Given a chance, I would not have been vaccinated, but I was vaccinated for the reason that I have already given you. But I just want to talk from the Bible standpoint, because there are so many groups of people and so many false teachers who have actually gone out into the world, and they are manipulating the Bible to try and mean what they want to push, their own agendas. And one of those things, if you remember last week I talked about two theories that are actually being brought around and they are being thrown around. One theory is what we dealt with last week, which was actually coming from Matthew chapter 24, where people are actually quoting that chapter and they are saying this chapter means the world is coming to an end, and because of what is happening with COVID, this is exactly in answer to what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24. And I think we saw that it was not true. Chapter 24 of the book of Matthew was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, which actually happened in the temple, and that was it. We cannot take it outside of that context. Then the second theory that I mentioned last week, which I just want to talk about this morning, is the theory about the vaccine itself, where so many people are actually teaching that if you have been vaccinated, you have just been initiated into Satanism. And they actually come to Revelation chapter 13 and they say, this is what John was talking about, that there is going to be a beast which is going to come, and you have been put the mark of a beast, which also has the number 666, 666. Let us try to address that and understand what John was talking about from Romans chapter 13. There are two beasts that John mentions in chapter 13 of the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation, we have said this before, that the language that John used is actually called apocalyptic language. It's called apocalyptic because it was meant to be understood by a certain section of the society, and it was meant to be hidden from the other section of the society. So John is actually going to use so many images, so many symbols, so many visions, and the language is a bit complicated to understand. But a little bit of understanding of history will actually help us understand what John was talking about in the book of Revelation. So in chapter 13, John is going to mention two beasts, at least two beasts. From verse 1 up to verse 10, he is talking about a beast which he actually saw coming out of the sea. Then from about verse 11 to the end of the chapter, which is around verse 18, he is now talking about the second beast. And he says this beast came out of the earth. So he has two beasts, one that came out of the sea and the other one that actually came out of the earth. But I want us to go back to the book of Daniel, because Daniel is actually going to give us a meaning of what John is now writing here. We are not going to understand what John is writing unless we also understand what Daniel wrote about. If we go back to the book of Daniel, way back in the Old Testament, this would have been almost 700 years that have gone by until the time that John is now writing this book. So at least 700 years almost have actually gone by, and Daniel is actually going to be writing way back then, and John is actually making references to what he actually wrote. Daniel is going to tell us about four beasts in Daniel chapter 7. And if we read what Daniel is saying in chapter 7 of the book of Daniel, we are actually going to see some pieces of Revelation chapter 13 coming together, because they actually sort of answer what Daniel had already talked about way back then, 700 years. I keep repeating that. At least 700 years, Daniel had written this. In chapter 7 of the book of Daniel, in the first year, verse 1, of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night And behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. So also Daniel, just like what is happening with John in Revelation, he is going to see four beasts that are actually coming out of the sea. But Daniel saw four of them, and he is going to mention them as we go forward from verse 4. One of them, the first that he saw, was looking like a lion. The other one that he saw in verse 5 was looking like a bear. The other one that he saw in verse 6 was looking like a leopard. But he then goes on in verse 7, and he says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, which he did not describe, and he doesn't tell us how it looked like. It was terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke it in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. It's interesting that he is going to mention about 10 horns here, and we are going to discover that John is also going to talk about these 10 horns when we get to Revelation chapter 13. Verse 8 says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots, and John is also going to talk about this. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Then, of course, he's going to talk about the Ancient of Days. From verse 9, the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. Then, of course, from verse 15, he is actually going to interpret the vision for us. And I want us to hear the interpretation that Daniel is going to give. From verse 15, he says, as for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever and ever. So if we stop there and we think about what Daniel is saying, he has already told us about the 4 beasts, one that looked like a lion, the other that looked like a bear, the other that looked like a leopard, then the other that he did not describe. But in short, he is saying these 4 beasts are representing 4 kingdoms that are actually going to come. But in the midst of these four kingdoms, the kingdom of God, which he actually talks about, but the saints in verse 18, the saints referring to the Christians, obviously, the Christians or the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom, and they will possess the kingdom forever, forever and ever. And of course we know from other writings in the New Testament, Colossians chapter 1 in particular, Paul talks about us having received the kingdom from God. And we are actually part of that kingdom. As he wrote earlier on in the book of Ephesians chapter 2, he actually talked about those that were Gentiles. And he said to them, you are no longer aliens, you are no longer foreigners, but you have also been taken into the commonwealth of Israel, meaning to say you are now saints as well. You can actually worship God together in his kingdom. Earlier on, Jesus had talked about this, I think, somewhere in the book of Mark, in the book of Luke as well. He talked about those that he was talking to at that particular time, and he said, some of you will still be living when they are going to see this kingdom coming with power. So, we have 4 beasts, but while these 4 beasts are still around, the kingdom of God is actually going to come, which is going to belong to the saints. He continues in verse 19 and says, then I desired to know the truth about the 4th beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the one that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this one made war with the saints. Take note of what verse 21 is saying. As I looked, this one made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. So we know, of course, that Daniel was actually talking about the 4 ethnic kingdoms that we have always talked about. In fact, the book of Daniel is full of many, many visions. They actually started from King Nebuchadnezzar himself, when he actually had a dream, which was almost like what Daniel is seeing now. The dream where Daniel is actually going to dream of, Nebuchadnezzar is dreaming of that image that actually had 4 parts, really, a human image, the head, the chest, the other parts, and the feet. It actually meant that there was Babylonian kingdom, then there was going to be the Medes and the Persian kingdom, there was going to be the Grecian kingdom, then there was going to be the Roman Empire. Daniel is confirming that here, that there are going to be 4 beasts. The first beast that looked like a lion obviously represents or represented Babylonian kingdom. The one that looked like a bear would actually represent the Medes and the Persians. The one that looked like a leopard was actually going to represent, according to Daniel, it was going to represent the Grecian Empire led by Alexander the Great. Then he goes on, Daniel, to the 4th kingdom, which he did not describe, but it was terrifying. This was actually going to represent the Roman kingdom or the Roman Empire. If we go back to Revelation chapter 13 now, and hear what John is actually talking about there. John is also going to talk about a beast from chapter 13, verse 1. And I saw a beast that was rising out of the sea. Daniel's beast rose from the sea. And John is also seeing a beast that rose from the sea. And what does he say? It had 10 horns. And also the last beast that Daniel saw, it had 10 horns. Then he continues and says, and 7 heads with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. So John's beast is going to combine characteristics of 3 beasts that Daniel saw. This beast that Daniel did not name is actually being named by John in the book of Revelation 700 years later, but it actually combined 3 of the characteristics of being like a lion, the characteristic of being like a leopard, and the characteristic of being like a bear. So John is going to see it, and he says, in verse 2, and the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? And the beast was given a mouth uttering hot and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. I think Daniel talks about time. He doesn't specify how long the time was, but he just says, I think, what does Daniel say? Time and times, or something like that. John is almost closer to what he's talking about, because he says that it was going to be given authority for 42 months. Meaning to say, after 42 months, it was going to stop. The authority was going to end. After 42 months, whatever he meant by 42 months. But this is a period that this beast is going to be given authority. But after 42 months, it's actually going to be 10, so to speak. So he goes and says, in verse 6, it opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints, meaning to say this beast was going to be allowed to make war against the saints, against the Christians, okay, and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. Of course, let us give meaning to what he says, all who dwell on the earth. This doesn't necessarily mean that the whole physical world. It obviously meant the physical world under which Roman Empire had control. If you read Luke chapter 2, when one of these Caesars, we are going to talk about him, gave a decree that everybody needed to be counted. You remember Mary, the Virgin, is actually in Nazareth. The reason why they are going to come down to to Judea and eventually land in Bethlehem where she's going to give birth. It's because there is Tiberius who has given an order that everybody, and the language that Luke uses is he ordered that everyone in the world should be counted. But that did not mean that everybody, including the physical world, was supposed to be counted. It's only those that were under his authority, they were supposed to be counted. And that's what it is saying here. Then after he saw this beast, John is going to see the second beast from verse 11. Let's read that. From verse 11, he then says, "Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. The one that he saw rose from the sea. This one that he is seeing now, it rose from the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of the people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666, 666. This is where we have a problem. Now, let us try to put some context to what we have just been reading, and what Daniel said, and what John is saying also. Daniel has talked about it, and is focusing into the future, some 700 years to come. He actually is talking about the four beasts. But one beast actually existed during his time, because this beast is Babylon, that is going to capture Judah. And Daniel is one of those that is going to be captured under Babylon. But Babylon, still during the lifetime of Daniel, Babylon is going to fall to the Medes and the Persia, and Daniel is actually going to serve in the Medes and the Persian authorities as well. But somewhere along the line, the Medes and the Persians are also going to fall to Alexander the Great. And for some years, Alexander the Great is going to be in charge. So what that basically means is, if Babylon, by the time that it is taken, let's start from the Assyria. Assyria is going to take Israel into captivity. So whatever territory that was for Assyria and Israel, it now belongs to Assyria. So if their territory was this short, Babylon is actually going to build up, and they are actually going to come and they are going to attack Assyria as well, including Judah. So it means they've enlarged their territory. But when Medes and the Persians are also going to come up to take down the Babylon, it means their territory is also increased. And that is still going to happen with Greece. Greece is going to come all the way from Europe, and they are actually going to come conquering everybody, including the Asia Minor, as we are looking at our map, coming down until they actually come into the whole area that would have been Mesopotamia. Then they are going to come down as far as Egypt. So they now have a bigger territory than what Babylon had. So Greek is going to be the third. Then if the Romans are also going to come into the picture, and they are going to conquer the Grecian Empire, and they are going to be, Rome actually was rolling all the way from Spain. They are actually going to come into Rome itself, almost the whole of Europe, going via the what was Achaia of the time, Macedonia, into Asia Minor, coming down to Mesopotamia as well, coming down all the way to Egypt. Rome is actually in control of all that. Now, when John is writing, John has actually been banished by one of these Caesars, and he has actually been banished into an island that was called Patmos. And he is seeing a vision that was a replica of what what Daniel had seen 700 years ago. And what John is seeing, he doesn't mention all the four beasts, but he actually mentioned only one beast, who was the fourth beast that Daniel saw. And that fourth beast that John is seeing and is talking about and is living under is the Roman kingdom. We have no doubt about that. He is living under Rome, and the beast that he is seeing, which is terrorizing the saints, is the Roman Empire. Okay, let's look at these men. And some of them, except the three that I've put that star in front of, they didn't have much connection with the saints and the church. But if and this man as well, he was the first emperor of, although he never wore the title Emperor Julius, but he was actually the first emperor, and he himself is going to die. It's believed he died around 44 BC. Then Augustus Caesar. These guys are actually going to be given the title Caesar. So Augustus is actually going to come into the picture around around BC 27, and when Jesus is being born, he actually is being born under Augustus. So Augustus is the one that is leading the Roman Empire when Jesus is going to be born. So for some time until about AD 14, he is the one that is in charge of the Roman Empire. In fact, by this time, Rome has been changed from being a republic and is now a full-time empire, which is now being led by somebody that was called an emperor. And Augustus Caesar is the first emperor of Rome in terms of wearing the title emperor. So he's going to be in, and of course when he goes out, Tiberius is going to come in, and by the time that Jesus is going to die, Tiberius is the one that was in charge. And of course we are going to have other guys like Caligula, Claudius, and this one is the one that is going to be an architect in the death of Paul, that is Nero. Are we seeing the persecution of the saints throughout the time of these guys? Nero is the one that is going to try and stop the church from progressing. So Nero himself had his own personal vendetta against the church. The history actually says he burned Rome, and he just wanted to show how powerful he was in terms of building infrastructure. So he's going to burn down Rome, and he's actually going to give blame to the Christians, and he said these people are the ones that have caused this problem. So he actually wanted to get an occasion to kill the Christians. So we understand that is when Paul is actually going to be murdered, because Paul is the one that was leading the Christians of the time. Nero himself is going to die maybe a year or two soon after Paul has been crucified. But after him, there's going to come Galba, Otho, Vitellius. These guys came within almost 1 year or 2 years, because they came and they were fighting themselves, so they didn't have to pay attention to the Christians, but they were fighting themselves. But after them were gone, then we are going to have this guy, Vespasian, and under him, Roman government, which was ruling everybody, which had started through Nero to accuse Christians of worshiping God, and they didn't want Christians to move on. They are actually going to make, so by that time it was just a personal perception from Nero that Christians should not worship. But when Vespasian came together with Titus, were still this guy called Domitian, they are the ones who even made it into a law that Christians are not supposed to worship. They outlawed worshiping God. And everybody who was going to worship God was supposed to be killed. Instead, they wanted everybody to worship them, to worship the emperor. That actually makes a lot of sense if we actually think about the two beasts that John is going to talk about. John is going to talk about a beast that is going to come, which obviously, according to what Daniel has told us in chapter 7, was the Roman Empire. We have no doubt about that. But when we come down, the second beast that John must have been talking about was this law, a legislature, which is going to be put in place, which is going to be supporting. So the first beast will be the Roman government. And the second beast should be the Roman law, which has been put in by the first beast, the Roman government, putting in the second law, the second beast, which is the law itself, which is now making it a serious crime. You are supposed to be killed if you don't worship an emperor. Of course, we know throughout history that probably when John is writing, he is actually under this guy, because he is going to die himself probably around AD 98. John is actually going to write, and he himself is going to die around AD 100 according to history. He lived under this guy. He must have lived under this guy. He also lived under this guy. But the reason why he is writing the book of Revelation is because the Christians are supposed to be warned, and the Christians are supposed to be reminded about what the prophet Daniel talked about, that it was not going to be a stroll in the park. You have tended to become a Christian, but you are not always going to enjoy the fruits of being a Christian at that particular time, because the Roman Empire is ravaging and they don't want anybody. At that particular time, the Christians are going to find it a little bit easy. After almost 300 years from this time that we are talking about, all this time until after about 300 years, they were being persecuted. Until a guy called Constantine is going to come into the picture as an emperor, and of course he also wanted to get some favors from Christians. That's when he then came and he changed the law, and he even said, it's believed that he is the first emperor who turned to become a Christian, a nominal Christian that is. But he actually became a Christian, Constantino, around 300 and something. That is in the 3rd century. So almost 300 years are going to pass after John had written Revelation, while the Christians were still under a lot of persecution. What are we talking about here? We are talking about those people that are saying Revelation chapter 13, which talks about a beast. It can be equated to the COVID-19 vaccine today. If you have been injected, if it has been injected into you, they tell us you have been initiated into Satanism. Some of them go on to tell us that this is the mark of the beast. I would actually say that is very much rubbish, because when John was writing almost 2,000 years ago, he was not even looking into the future, and he never envisaged this thing called COVID-19 coming. There is no way we can link what John was writing about to the COVID-19 situation today. There is no connection at all. All that is actually being said by those people who have an agenda, or those people who really don't understand what they are talking about, because the Bible is no link at all with COVID-19. Then, the last verse of Revelation chapter 13 talks about this number 666. Let's try to talk about that number also. The Hebrews had their way of changing words into numbers. I think we also have a way when we talk about the Roman numerals. Roman numerals, if we are talking about a word like a number like 10, in Roman numerals, or 10, in Roman numerals, I think what do we do? What is 10? 10 is an X. We have a way, if it was 5, in Roman numerals, I think 5 is a V. Hebrews had their own system as well, which was called gematria. It was similar to what we are talking about now. So what Romans would have what Hebrews would then do was, there was a number 6. Number 6 had its meaning. We know number 7, I think, from the Bible. Number 7 is so much repeated in the Bible. And what have we always said about number 7? We have always said number 7 meant something that was complete. Am I right? Number 7 in the Bible always talked about something that was complete. Number 6 actually talked about the opposite. Something that was incomplete. Something that was incomplete. Something that was manufactured or created by men. This would have been complete because it was created by God. It came from the concept that God created the world in 6 days and he rested on the 7th day. So in 7 short days, God had made the creation of the world. So that is complete. But 6 would be the opposite of complete. So if we say 6 means something that was not complete, or something that was from the earth, or something that was human, according to gematria of the Hebrews. Let us remember that John is a Hebrew, and John is actually writing to Hebrews as well, who are being persecuted by Rome, who are not Hebrews, who may not understand what is being written. So I wouldn't know why John repeated 666, whether he actually wanted to make sure that he is saying this thing is triple not complete. Whatever he meant, I don't know. But I just wanted us to think along those lines. That Hebrews had a way that was called gematria, which actually helped them to understand some of the words. They would not say them as sentences, but they would put them into numbers. And 6 actually, as I was researching, meant something that was not complete. Why John decided to use 666 in this particular passage, I don't know. But what I know, according to the Hebrew Gematria alphabet, 6 was something that was not complete. So this should be connected to what John was talking about. I thought I needed to just put in that because this verse or this chapter ends with telling us that the number is called 666. But the conclusion of what I've been saying is, let us not allow anybody to come to us and tell us about Revelation chapter 13 and actually tell us that Revelation chapter 13 is connected to what is happening today. It has nothing, no connection whatsoever with what is happening today. There is nothing that is called the mark of the beast to a Christian. There is nothing absolutely like that. What John was referring to on the day was that the Caesars of Rome were going to persecute Christians. They were going to force every Christian to worship them. If you are actually going to worship somebody and you agree with what they are saying, it's as good as you have been put, the mark has been put on you to be like that. I remember somewhere Paul writes in one of his books, which book is this? Where he actually talks about he actually says, the mark of Christ has actually been put on me. Something like that. The mark of Christ has been put on me. Does it mean that something came or somebody came and they physically put a mark on Paul to say, you are now a Christian? A mark of Christ has been put on you. It has been put on me. Does it mean that somebody came physically to put a mark on you to show that you are a Christian? Is that what Paul was talking about? In Galatians chapter 3 actually says, for all those that were baptized into Christ, we have worn Christ. We are going to be seen by the way we do things. In Galatians chapter 2, he had said, I was crucified, and it's no longer I who lives, but Christ who is living in me. So those that were baptized into Christ have a mark of Christ on them. Does it mean that it has to be a physical mark that is going to come, that has to come and be put on their bodies? That is not the case. The mark is actually going to be spiritual. We are branded. How are we branded? We are not branded physically, but spiritually we are branded. That is what John was talking about. These guys were going to brand those that are going to follow them. We have political parties all over. If you follow a certain political party, you actually have a brand of that political party. Does it mean that you have been put physically a brand on you? That's not what John was talking about. There is nothing that is called a mark of a beast to a Christian, at least according to Revelation chapter 13. They should quote some other passages if ever they are there, which I don't believe they can find them if they want to push their agenda. I thought we could probably be helped by this small history that is up on the board. Thank you very much for your listening.